So today we'll be doing this passage on when does after begin. So it's a great passage on the temporal qualities of art, the human life, and all the questions regarding it. Shortly before 7:90 a.m. on 19 September 1985, time began to shift in Mexico City. It started with a tremor emerging from the subduction zone on the Pacific coast about 300 kilometers southwest of the metropolis. The magnitude 7.4 quake took less than a minute to travel through the surface of southern Mexico before arriving beneath the city. Amplified by soft soils, it reached magnitude 8.1, killing, according to government data, around 10,000 people. The real number is likely much high, perhaps as many as 40,000 people, and immediately causing 400 buildings to collapse. Telephone lines went down, sewage flooded the drinking water, roads into and out of the city became blocked. In the aftermath, up to 700,000 of estimated 9.1 million residents in the federal district of Mexico City were left homeless. The state response to the disaster was catastrophically incompetent, and behind it all, as the events descended into memory, time itself began to take an even stranger forms. So, a very statistical and as well as a vivid description of how the earthquake affected Mexico City, and the effect was not only based on just statistics of how many people, buildings, and other infrastructure was damaged, but it took a strange effect on the conception and the understanding of time by the people of Mexico City. During the following years, the whole city and federal governments grappled with the political fallout. The anniversary of the earthquake became a date on which state expresses its contrition for the past and demonstrates its preparedness for the future. Ever since 1985, a minute silence is held on 19 September, followed by commemorative events, the unveiling of memorials and monuments, the inauguration of new preventive technologies and infrastructures, and the promulgation of risk reduction legislation, all to ensure that similar disasters are avoided. So, the years following 1985, Mexico City holds a day of remorse as well as a day of understanding that we are prepared for the future in any case if events such as this happen in the future. So that 19 September day is marked as a day of both remorse, contrition, and always also preparedness. The state performances are met with protests from residents demanding the government be held to account for rampant corruption in the real estate industry, and has led to the substandard construction in many of the collapsed buildings. In the early 1990s, evacuation drills were added to the commemorative events, and in early 2000, these anniversary evacuations followed the sounding of the city's seismic alert system. This Seismics, which was gradually being implemented across metropolis. From the loudspeakers on street corners, the alert begins as a pulsing, vibrating rhythm that is almost more eerie than alarming. Over this sound, a cold, monotone voice repeats the words Alerta Sismica, which the anniversary becomes a day for declaring the events of 19 September 1985 will never happen again. It turns the earthquake into something to be realized, and a historical event. All that changed in 2017 when the alarm sounded twice, once for the memorial and commemorative evacuations, and then again 2 hours later for a devastating magnitude 7.1 earthquake that killed more than 300 people and 11 dozens of buildings. For the survivors, the coincidence began to create profound temporal disorientation. So, there were two very high magnitude earthquakes hitting Mexico City on the same date, like years apart, but the date was same. So it created a very destabilizing understanding of time for the survivors itself. How survivors ask each other, could this be happening? How could the two most devastating earthquakes in Mexico City's history strike on the same date? Some residents told me that when the second alarm sounded, they assumed it was another commemoration of the 85 earthquake rather than a warning of the new tremor. And so they remained in their buildings until the city began to shake. Fernanda, a woman living in southern Mexico, told me, I simply could not believe it. I heard the alert and thought to myself, that's strange, another drill. I did not think that's another earthquake. I guess I thought earthquakes would only come 364 days of the year. So just because there was an earthquake on that 19 September day, and it was such a low probability that it would happen again on the same day, right? And there were commemorative events like sounding the alarm on that particular day. So the people were already disarmed regarding any chances that the earthquake could strike again on the same day. So that was the thing that happened here. The apparent impossibility of the coincidence wreaked havoc in the within with the past and present. People ran home to check on their apartments only to inadvertently run back in time to where they lived in 85. My friend Eli told me that when the city's second alert began sounding before 17 earthquake, he became estacado, meaning stranded. Here was the alert saying that an earthquake will happen, he told me, shaking his head. But a large part of me is just wondering, where am I? Is this really happening? Another friend, Carlos, described a similar sense of confusion. Earthquakes that were once separate earthly events were now interconnected reminder that the earth is always happening to us. And for Elena, who I met at 2019 at a protest for still homeless victims, the earthquakes never really ended. Though the tremors stopped, their effects lingered. So this paragraph shows the understanding and how every different people conceive the events. Like one of them particularly stands out, like the earth is is always happening to us. So the temporal interval that the human experiences, the time interval the human experiences, is far less than what the earth is going through, right? So that is huge understanding of how small we are with respect to what the earth is going through is kind of puts things in perspective. These responses are all reflect sensibility that is now common in Mexico City. When the 2017 earthquake struck, time itself shifted a little. Younger people who remember the 85 disaster through annual commemoration find themselves stranded between the inertia of human historical time, of clocks, calendars, and national anniversaries, and the demands of a looping geological moment. Since then, for many residents, it was as if the present became ceaseless and extensive, and the past and the future stopped being mutually exclusive temporal categories. At a 2020 survey by the newspaper El Financiero showed Mexico City residents were particularly fearful of earthquakes, but during my time in the city, I noticed that this fear was new and different. After the 2017 event, people had become more afraid of earthquakes. Like people living in other seismic zones, cities residents are accustomed to experiencing them, but the coincidence in 2017 proved too strange to be simply consigned to Earth's arbitrary movement. So, this the two events happening on the same date was just could not be chalked down to a coincidence, right? So this created a very innate fear between the people of Mexico City towards earthquakes. Alongside the increased fear of seismicity, that same survey showed that much of the city is frightened of the 19th September as a date. So much of the people of Mexico City are afraid of the date because in their vision that is the date when disaster strikes. In the city's collective imagination, the earthquakes that have occurred on dates since 2017 and more mere geological flotsam. 19th September, however, is a day that now belongs to Earth. So, 19th September, the day shows how insignificant we are to the earthly processes. Each anniversary, residents will attempt to either work from home, find open spaces away from buildings, or leave Mexico City entirely. All are worried about being caught somewhere precarious when the 19th September arrives, and each year fewer and fewer attend protests, but not because they're losing interest in justice for those who lost their homes in 17, but they're also terrified of being in the city on the anniversary. I'm an anthropologist who writes about time, the state, and how people experience strange, inconceivable events. During the 6 years I conducted ethnographic research in Mexico City, I learned a little about how the geological coincidence in 2015 has shifted residents' experience of time. One change is that the unlikelihood of the coincidence showed that time was never really under human control. Like this is putting things in perspective. Though a geological event can seem to have ended from human perspective, it may, as Carlos told me, still be ongoing for Earth. In geological terms, the interval between 1985 and 2017 is just an instant. So, as I said, any kind of human interval is just that much insignificant to what the Earth is going through. The dilation of human time by Earth becomes especially visceral as each anniversary approaches, and geological forces promise once again to gather human futures turn ongoing earthly present. Though the time might seem to be advancing for humans, the future becoming the present past. This temporal flow is contained in one duration for Earth, a long geological now. So, what seems to be lifetimes for us is actually a very short instant for the Earth itself. In the temporal imagination of Mexico City's residents, it's as if 19th September has become three things: a date on the calendar, a reminder of the events of city's history, and a marker of the inhuman forces that have ravaged the earth in perpetuity. For many residents, the category of the past, present, and future have become subject to the whims of a capricious earth. So, our basis that our basis on which the ideas of past, present, future, and any kind of time interval is created is based on the art's events or the art's workings. And the art's workings are very capricious and very fickle in nature. They won't conform to a single rule, right? So this just shows how unstable our workings are with respect to what the art does. Opening a geologic textbook unleashes a torrent of metaphor and analogy in which art appears to live and breathe. Slopes are described as retreating, mountain revived, and other stuff. As a descriptive science, noticing deep time processes that appear static in human lifetimes, like the movements of tectonic plates, require a turn to the metaphoric. Art metaphors seem to provide a sense of stability in our lives that liquid metaphors can't. Like we lay the groundwork, seek a sure footing, terra firma, and all this stuff. Perhaps this sense of stability is why seismology offers such a potent metaphors for massive, sudden, or irreversible changes. We might hear about tectonic shifts in values and meanings, or intense political fault lines, or of an event's inevitable aftershocks. This last metaphor, aftershock, is particularly malleable. It is used to describe post traumatic stress disorder, interest rate rises, then the fallout of COVID 19 pandemic, and many other moments in which changes produce lasting effects. It's a metaphor that locates an event by pointing to its consequences using a linear imagination of time to move from cause to effect. But looking at the experience of aftershock sequences can open our imaginations to how time's coherence is contingent upon the stability of an erratic earth. So this passage tells us about the various metaphors that we build on the supposed stability of earth. It's not actually very stable, right? We think it to be stable because our lifetime is such so significant. Again, the same stuff. But the last metaphor the author uses, aftershock, is particularly malleable because this seems to be the thing that follows a certain very big event, right? Aftershock succeeds a certain big event, and we cannot say something to be a main event until we, like, the series or the linear sequences of events cannot be judged very greatly because we don't know how, in what order they are going to come and go, right? So that's the main thing to take from this passage. The term aftershocks comes from the Japanese seismologist Fusakichi Omori, who realized in 1895 that three major Japanese earthquakes in Kumamoto, Nobi, and Kagoshima were in fact a single staggered event. By identifying their contiguity, the similarity of the waveform, and other factors, he positioned these events into an ongoing process that became known as the aftershock sequence. Omori's law and Utsu's later amendments, Omori-Utsu law, state that after a shallow earthquake, the part of a fault that slipped will readjust, causing connected earthly movement. So there will be many more earthquakes following a main earthquake. So in concrete terms, the likelihood of an aftershock the day after an earthquake will be half what it was the day of an earthquake, 1/10 by the 10th, and so on. In the mid 20th century, the Gutenberg-Richter law added that the higher the magnitude of the main shock, the more frequent and stronger are its aftershocks. Importantly, though aftershock timings, numbers, and locations broadly conform to the statistical rules, they remain stochastic. Paying attention to different forms of aftershock transforms the linear sequence of events into something strange and less determinate. Context renders metaphor uncanny. For instance, an important variable is the speed with which tectonic plates move. Along the San Andreas Fault, which moves around 37 mm per year, aftershock sequences tend to end about 10 years from an earthquake. So, like, the law state that the main earthquake will be succeeded by various different aftershocks, and the magnitude and various frequencies can be some kind of judged, right? But the thing is that these events are not very linearly separated. Like, we can't determine them exactly when they will happen, and these are something very strange in nature, as said here by the author, and less determinate. So we can't exactly put a finger like this will be the date the earthquake is going to occur. Like, this is something always very descriptive in nature. Like, we describe it as it happens, not before. We do not predict or do something like that. So these are the some of the examples of this where the San Andreas fault, like the amount of movement is very, like the amount of movement, like it is highly correlated with the amount of time the earthquake goes on for. In the 14 months after the 1891 Nobi earthquake in Japan, 3090 aftershocks were recorded. By 1975, 3 or 4 still registered each year. Some seismologists theorize that the magnitude 7.6 earthquake that struck Chiloé Island in Chile in 2016 was an aftershock. So these are the some of the examples of various aftershocks of the main shock that was experienced before they were actually recorded. An aftershock sequence is a slippery temporality, so it has a weird aspect of time related to it. Despite its use as a metaphor denoting a linear succession of events, like we can say that the aftershock happens after a main shock, right? And there can be four shocks, like four shocks meaning the shocks that occur before the main shock actually does. Like we can term very like we can categorize every earthquake based on these, right? But we do not know what the main shock is. Like the main shock is like commonly termed to be the earthquake with the highest magnitude, right? But we do not know like what magnitude the current earthquake is going to be. Such as take for example today's earthquake has a certain magnitude and tomorrow's is a higher than that. So we are going to term tomorrow's as the main shock, right? But if the day after that the greater earthquake comes along, we are going to term that as the main shock. So there is a temporal fickleness related to it. So we can't put our finger on which one is the aftershock and which one is the foreshock and main shock. So this describes how many people have experienced the uncanny geological temporality of Mexico City. The 2017 earthquake was not an aftershock of the 85 tremor. The unpredictable temporality of aftershock sequence, particularly the notion of an uncertain present, is a means of understanding residents' sense that geological time had displaced the time of Mexico City. So yeah, geological time had greater importance than the time in Mexico City. What might be after for the city might still might be before for Earth. So this shows a disparity between how we perceive time based on a geological aspect and as well as a human aspect. I was in Mexico City in 2021 in the weeks before 19 September, and as the date approached, a sense of uncertain present began to return once again. While traveling through the city, overhearing conversations, I began to get a sense of these anxieties. Some residents began to worry that this 19 September would be Mexico City's last. Shortly before 9 pm on 7 September, as I sat reading in the window of my apartment with the buzz of fat summer raindrops filling the street below, I heard the speaker of the city's early warning system. So there was like on 9 p.m. 7 September of 2021, there was another earthquake of magnitude 7.1, and author received a text message from a friend. No way, it's September 7 again. So the thing was on 2017, like the last year the earthquake was received. On September 7 there was a foreshock to the main shock that was on September 19. So the people in Mexico City took to thinking that this was also a warning that there is going to be a larger earthquake of higher magnitude on September 19. So they thought we had 12 days. So this line is what captures the entire emotion of the people in Mexico City. They thought we had 12 days and this year is going to be Mexico City's last. The odds were so low that the earthquake would appear on the same date in 1985 and 2017 that some residents felt that they are exposed to a time scale that would make such geological coincidences possible. So we are understanding and wordplay on the aspects of time. And so another earthquake was expected to arrive on 19 September 2021 and every other year since 27 coincidence. Back in 2018, on the first anniversary of 2017 quake approached, a cartoon by Victor Solis was shared widely across social media, particularly in WhatsApp group chat I shared with victims and their advocates. So this is the cartoon that's been talked about, like a man in pajamas praying for the September 19th date, just before the September 19th date, and the text tells and that tomorrow would be nothing more than just the drill. So they are praying that there is no more earthquakes, and they are hoping that New Mexico survives yet another year. This feeling was underpinned the 12 days of expectation. Shortly after I received the message from my friend alerting me to the similarities of the 17 earthquakes, a rumor went viral across Mexican social media reminding the city of its geological history. A common version of the message reads, "Do you want to scare yourselves?" There was a strong earthquake in Mexico City on 19 September. A earthquake gravely damaged the heart of Mexico City. On 7 September 2017, Mexico City trembled hard. Then on 19 September, yet another earthquake shook Mexico. And today, 7 September, it just trembled very hard. Strange coincidence. So it's just a like very ominous message on predicting how this year on 19 September there's going to be another one. So residents were convinced that the city's repeating geological loop had initiated during the ominous 12 days between 7 and 19. Seismologists appeared for interviews, reminding the city that the earth care nothing for calendars, human calendars. So experts were trying to say that there is no actual coincidence, like that it doesn't happen that way. There is no need to be frightened just because of those two coincidences. Contrary to the rumors, there was no significant earthquake on 7 September 85, 7 September 1985. Despite all the assurances and all the evidences against the fact that there has to be an earthquake on 19 September, like the people had an ominous feeling and they thought there was going to be an earthquake on 19 September. This expectation sometimes transforms anxiety into outright hysteria and panic. After hearing commemorative sounding of Mexico City's earthquake alarm, some residents have nervous breakdowns. They throw themselves out of windows or fall downstairs. So how these anxieties manifest themselves in case of like hearing the commemorative sounding is described here. They throw themselves out of windows, fall downstairs. Like the commemorative sounding has resulted in a number of injuries, and the governor has announced them. The double anniversary is so heavy with earthly time and its human history that it is as if until 2017 19 September was a date on which earthquake couldn't happen, but after 2017 it became a date on which they had to. So this is how events change the perception of the people in Mexico City, right? Like till 2017 19 September, the idea was like we on this date we had an earthquake, and any other date on the year is very common, like very okay to we are okay to have an earthquake on other days, right? Because I mean it's just normal to like the chances are incredibly low for an earthquake to happen on that particular day, and so the idea was we can have it on any other day, but that day it's like if the earthquake happens on that day, it's something special or it's something caused it to happen on that day, right? So after having the earthquake, the mentality changed from it couldn't happen on that day to it has to happen on that day. So like the understanding of the people of the time of the earthquakes completely changed. We waited nervously through the 12 days of anticipation in 2021. Ultimately, an earthquake does not strike on 19 September, but relief is short-lived. Unfortunately, Mexico City, there is a 19 September every year. So the cycle of anxiety and all other hysteria repeats every year, right? There is a 19 September every year. An annual promise that the city after has yet to begin. We are waiting and expecting will it happen again. In an earthquake, the time of earth and the time of human experience intersect. As John McPhee suggests, in the annals of former world, thinking at these two time scales, one human and emotional, the other geologic, induces a form of temporal schizophrenia because they are so different, so disparate. Generally, the experience of geological time at a day-to-day level involves an abstracted, expanded frame of reference that demands leaps of imagination. Picture seeing emptiness where Mount Fuji stood envisages the landmass now known as India, all this stuff. But in Mexico City post 2017, the peculiar convergence of these two timescales provokes a more visceral sense of earthly forces that would otherwise remain abstract. This feeling of a deep time present becomes especially acute on the most geologically unstable date in Mexican history. So, the author John McPhee suggests that the time scales of both the earth and the human emotions and all those stuff have intersected in Mexico City. Like the two different narratives that are have been created. One, the earth going parallelly with the human lives. One being like individuality of the human lives being very insignificant to the earth's narrative. They coincide in the Mexico City as the form of the earthquake. So that is the very temporal description of Mexican history which we portrayed here. On 19 September 2019, I stood alongside earthquake victim advocacy groups in Mexico City while we waited for the commemorative evacuation drill. While the alert began sounding, many around me put their fingers in their ears to drown out the robotic voice, as if the early warning alert itself was somehow causal of earthquakes. The woman said under her breath that the earth will remain tranquil today, and we murmured our agreement. The alert drowned us out. So, this shows how people started attaching ominous senses with anything they could find, right? They thought that the response, like the emergency response or the alert systems, were the things causing the earthquakes. Like they hated and had a fear towards anything related to that earthquake. Even one explanation of this fears is PTSD, seismic PTSD, a fearful response to a date marked by human grief and suffering that volatile earth can deliver. Understandable. This may be true to some extent, but understanding the experience of being ensnared in geological time as a form of trauma is insufficient. Trauma can psychologize experiences, obscuring the important role of structural and environment factors. Like trauma can cause us to attach anything and everything to that event, right? Trauma can also be an elastic concept capable of describing the experiences of Ruth Lace, pointed in a 2000 book. Both the attendees of a wedding bombed by a drone and the pilot who did the bombing. So, like it's an elastic concept, like it can affect anyone, both the victims and the causers, like both the cause and effects, both attached to both the cause and effects. But most importantly, trauma has a linear temporality, especially in experiences of post-traumatic stress, in which the past event determines the future. The linear sense of time and history can reduce contemporary experience to an epiphenomenon of the past, which risks discounting the strangeness of the present in Mexico City. To view residents' fear as seismic PTSD would also require overlooking what happened an hour ago. Okay, so the thing is, we can't just reduce what the people in New Mexico are feeling to as to trauma, right? It is not all actually PTSD, because PTSD is something that's temporarily linear. Like it happens because of a past event. But the thing that's happening to them is not because of a past event, right? Their future is also their present is also at stake. Like earthquakes can happen anytime and every time. So they're in a constant state of frenzy. So that's what it is. When the third 19 September earthquake happened and the ground began to tremble, the city lost power. The magnitude 7.7 tremor was felt in 12 states and a lot of damage was done. But it was relatively minor compared to the earthquakes of 85 and 2017. And as the city shook for a third time, the temporality of trauma shifted. Fears and anxieties that might have appeared to result from past disasters could no longer be considered as PTSD, because there was no post. The thing to fear was now in the present, and the thing to fear about was the future. Human time was being swallowed by an abyssal geological present. So the author provides now his account. I ran to check on my apartment, went to a cantina. The power was out, the bartenders were taking beers and putting them on the street. The people were drinking beers on the street. It was very low probability, like 0.000751% chance of happening. But improbability does not mean impossibility, right? Like it's not probable, but it's absolutely possible. I heard countless theories that explained the tremor. The city was in an earthly loop simply beyond human comprehension. Residents' fear of the dead somehow manifested the earthquake. Like people coming up with these weird theories about why they happened. Some said it because of the alert system. Like it is attached with like mishaps. Like people's fears were manifesting into this form of earthly activities. The earth was going through a cycle every year. But above all, held the idea that Mexico City's residents were justified in their fears. 19th September no longer belonged to humans. The city has been set adrift in a time of earth. So the idea was that the city, then on 19th September, the city belonged no more to the humans of the city. The earth and nature had complete control over us, and the events of that day were enough to point out the harsh truth. The 3/19 September tremors are not formally defined as an aftershock sequence. For some residents, it feels as if after will never begin. So a great idea, like the we can't like we can't. This is not a great puzzle piece to fit or juxtapose in the like linear temporality, right? We are currently in a moment described as the Anthropocene, an epoch in which the action of some human registers the geological scale, such as nuclear radiation, plastic carbon emission. From this vantage, the future becomes an after effect of human action, but Mexico City and the 19th September points toward a different relationship with human and geological, in which time itself an effect of Earth. Like the current situation we are in most cases, our actions define future, right? What going to happen in future, like nuclear radiation, climate change, and all those stuff. But in one city, Mexico City, like humanity has lost its control. It seems like the Earth is in a relationship with time. It's controlling its own time. For the city's residents, the disaster of 1985 is in the past. It's 2017 earthquake is in the past. Even 2022 event is in the past. But as this discrete events slip into human memory, the three are folded into Earth's geological present. In Mexico City, geological now, the relationship between past, present, and future is not preordained, and the temporal geometrics contoured human history to strange and terrifying shapes. Mexico City's time is dislocated, its residents stranded, and 19 September is now, like its own axis of time, an yearly reminder that humans might not be in charge of when after begins. So this was a great passage on like describing the temporality of events, how time, like the relationship of time with humans and Earth, sorry, not Earth. Like it shows that we can, we can change events in the future, right? But what we do and the things we experience in our lifetime is like vastly insignificant to what the Earth is going through, the intervals that it has in its own register, like yeah. So like 19 September events of New Mexico City shows that we are not in control. The Earth is always in control, and we are just like suffering and reaping its benefits, like whatever it may be. So overall, a great passage.